and welcome to this edition of EdTech Mondays Africa. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. On this edition, we're talking about evidence that scales, what works for EdTech in Africa. Across the continent, EdTech initiatives, despite progress made so far, remain fragmented, leading to duplication and inefficiencies. Investments in this sector often prioritize technology acquisition over measurable learning outcomes, while sustainable financing models remain underdeveloped, thus risking long-term viability. According to the World Bank, the related systemic investment needs are substantial, but evidence of effectiveness is scarce and risks abound. Policymakers face formidable, multifaceted opportunities and challenges in equal measure in designing and implementing digitally enabled education services at scale. On the other hand, decision or data-driven decision-making is a powerful tool for scaling EdTech because it transforms fragmented initiatives into coherent, evidence-based systems. Our panelists are George Werner, Liberia's former Minister of Education, Verna Lalbihari, the Executive Director at EdTech Hub, Grace Njoroge, Director of Digital Economies Africa at Karibu, and Shrouk Alaldin, who is the co-founder and CEO of Career 180. My first question to George, given your experience as Minister of Education in Liberia, what are some of the factors that determine budgetary allocations to ministries of education in your country and everywhere else across Africa?
You can talk about financing in the public sector without talking about ministries of finance and development planning, right? So what there are many factors, but finance ministers like to see three things together. One, they like numbers. In that sense, therefore, they're thinking about measurable results. They're also thinking about affordability at scale, and they're thinking about sustainability. Those three things are critical when putting together an investment package for education.
Which of these three that you've mentioned are usually the top priority, or which one is usually the top priority?
You can have multiple pilots all over the place. The question is really asked whether or not this is contributing to learning outcomes, right? And if it is, how can you scale it? Then you think about costs. Can the government afford scaling this? So the expense or how expensive it is probably the most important thing. But these three factors are linked: your measurable results, the affordability, and the sustainability of it.
Verna, if I come to you from your work with governments, what distinguishes evidence that is useful for scaling EdTech from that data that is interesting but not really actionable?
Building a culture of evidence-based decision-making, in my view, is one of the most significant things that we can do to ensure that technology is used in ways that actually move the needle on student learning and address what we know still exists as a global learning crisis. The honest reality we encounter again and again is that when governments go looking for evidence to support EdTech, any kind of EdTech decision, it's often not there. Or if it is there, it's too old, it's inaccessible, it's disconnected from the context to be of any real use. So this gap is really frustrating. From everything we've learned at the EdTech Hub in working directly with ministries of education, evidence becomes actionable when it meets four conditions. First, it has to respond to the problem the government is actually trying to solve. It also has to land at the right moment in the funding reform cycle. So tied to George's earlier comments around finance, making sure that the evidence is connected to budget cycles when big decisions are being made is really important. It has to be relevant. So answering yesterday's questions, or if it arrives after the budget has been set, then it really cannot be actionable. Secondly, it needs to be packaged in a way that decision makers can use it. So in ways that decision makers can actually digest the information. We know that a lot of the ministries we work with really don't have the luxury of free time. And they're often navigating competing priorities and frankly speaking, really high stakes pressures. So, really, this going to dense academic research, no offense to it, it's really important, is really not going to work for our ministry. So, really thinking about the form that the evidence takes is as important as the content. At the Hub, we invest in learning briefs, in pithy blog posts, in evidence synthesis in ways that can actually relate to a policy audience. And then third, it needs to be communicated by someone that is really a trusted partner, someone that is technically savvy and embedded in the ministry. So proximity matters, as opposed to having outside third party data. So making sure that the findings land in a way that can be digestible from a trusted partner. So trust-based relationships are really important. We see them as a nice to have, not a must have. And finally, the evidence in order to be actionable has to be shared early and often. We don't have the luxury of time again, and so we can't really wait for long-term randomized control trials or at the end of a project cycle. So thinking about how we build in implementation research or agile methodologies like sandbox methodologies that generate real-time insights that we can feed back to government is really important, so that when the decisions are being made, the data is ready and there to be taken up.
I like the fact that you mentioned problem response, and the fact that also packaging is important. Grace, if I might come to you from your work across the digital economies at Caribou and elsewhere across the globe, what are the key system barriers that prevent proven EdTech solutions from scaling within African markets?
The technology is there, the technology is working, and we've seen a lot of really innovative platforms, a lot of cutting edge EdTech solutions that really have been put out there. When it comes to scaling, though, we need more than the platform, we need more than the technology. The system then comes in, or the market then has to come in to really take up this platform, take up the solutions, and move them forward to scaling. So I'd categorize the barriers to scaling at the market level in three main buckets. So the first barriers or things that are really hindering scale are looking at connectivity issues. So first of all, connectivity is not standard across countries. Even in a country like Kenya, where internet connectivity is really high, we do find there are areas where that connectivity is not as good as in urban areas or in areas like Nairobi or the urban cities. The second thing is looking at affordability, and affordability here is both affordability of the devices, because then the end user, looking at the learners who ultimately have to use this information, the platforms, looking at the teachers, looking sometimes even at the parents who have to support the students with their homework. Devices are not really 100% across the geographies, and even when we look at platforms, a lot of the devices that are needed to access these platforms are smartphones, digital devices that again are probably a bit out of reach, especially for low-income households. Affordability also goes beyond the devices, and we also look at things like data. So data, again, is a huge recurring cost that households, that teachers, that schools need to invest in before they can then take access and use the platform. And then again, looking at using the platform, it is not really a one-off cost, but it's a recurring cost. So schools that are not connected to Wi-Fi's, homes, students, teachers that have to keep buying mobile data to replenish the use so that they can access the platforms. The third thing that I can look at is or talk about is some of these platforms are not free for you. So you find that some of them have a free content, but then it gets to a level where then they have to pay for the premium content to access the content that they can use. So that's the first set of barriers related to the end users. And then there are also other things related to end users, such as how does this content or how are these platforms supporting persons with disabilities, for example, supporting marginalized youth, supporting people without access, or people who are even more disadvantaged than even the normal users that we are looking and solving for this this solution for. The second thing, looking at the systems, apart now from the end user challenges that are there that need to be overcome, is the platforms need to scale, and the government really looks at cost and really a lot of numbers before they can take up these platforms. And then there's also the issue about procurement. So by the time the government procures, goes through the procurement process in bringing on board these platforms, you find that governments really are not fast, especially in our continent. Procurement processes are slow. And so by the time a technology platform is getting onboarded, you'll find that several months have passed, or could even take up to a year. And the technology either has become outdated, it has been updated several times. And so this also poses challenges. And then the third one, which Varna has also alluded to, is data is fragmented. So when it comes to the data that the innovators have, the platforms have, it is not speaking the same language as the government wants, or the kind of data that the government wants, the kind of data that or evidence that the funders want. And so there's a lot of fragmentation that then is not really helping these edtechs to move from pilot to scale.
Shrouk, if I come to you, given the fact that you are an edtech solution in Egypt, there are quite a number of pieces of evidence that do play into government decision making. But what kind of evidence have governments or partners actually asked you for when considering your solution for scale?
The first thing that they ask for is our company profile and our track record. It's asked for the credibility of how we can implement different qualifying and hiring projects. For example, as K180, we qualified or we impacted more than 600,000 youth across the continent. And we also supported 75,000 hirings. So they ask how we do it, the employment outcomes, the income improvement, the learning methodology that we used in different qualifying and hiring projects, and the retention, the engagement rates versus drop-offs. As you can see, a lot of projects that you have, for example, 1,000 calibers or 1,000 youth joining the program, but who completed the program, it's nearly 500. So how we overcome the drop-offs and how we prevent the drop-offs, and the scalability proof, ability to localize and replicate our model across different countries and across different projects in the same country, and also the revenue stream. As the biggest challenge in any edtech startup in Africa or even in the world is the fund. You can assign a specific project to a startup, and then in the middle of the project, the startup fail to continue the project as they lack of fund. So any startup or edtech startup, once you get assigned to a specific project, you have to make sure that you have a specific fund localized for it or customized for the projects, so you be able to continue it. And one of the things that supported us is the investment, and also joining, we were part of the MasterCard Foundation EdTech Fellowship program, and that supported us for the sake of credibility with the governments, with the NGOs in different countries in Africa, actually, and also in Middle East, and also to take more and more projects with NGOs and international organizations and even multinational corporates.
What are the risks of over-reliance on data? Because, if you're looking at this from a perspective of continuity, but also from the perspective of ability to duplicate across multiple countries, have you identified any risks associated with over-reliance on data, given the fact that governments rely on data, on numbers, before they can make decisions on whether or not to even consider your solution for anything at all?
We have risk of focusing on vanity matrix. For example, how we can complete the project over or versus real learning outcomes, ignoring soft skills and behavioral transformation. You can check a caliber who's lack of communication skills, and at the end of the program, they are perfect in their communication skills. The data sometimes fail to track this. And also data bias due to unequal access, digital divide, and gender, and lack of context behind numbers, culture, economics realities. So we can combine the quantitative data with the qualitative insights to track the full learning insights, and to track the full engagement, skills, employment, and how they are developed in their skills and in their qualifications, and also in their behavioral communication.
Grace, if I come to you just to connect to what Shruk has actually spoken about, the part where she talks about an equal access and also the issue around continuity, which is also something you alluded to when you talked about fragmented data. Why do we continue to see fragmented pilots in EdTech despite the growing evidence and also the fact that there seems to be so much that's missing at the system or market level? Why is this?
The disconnect comes when it comes to scaling. And then the two issues in terms of why we are really seeing a lot of fragmented pilots. Number one, pilots are not learning from each other. So you find a number of solutions that are doing exactly the same thing instead of learning from each other, building on each other, looking at what is working and then what else is not working that they can build for. So the first key issue that we are seeing in terms of why there's a lot of fragmentation is that innovators are not speaking to each other. Everyone wants to build their own thing. Everyone wants to run with their own thing, build their own infrastructure from start, and go to the funder, present their shiny proposal and their shiny platform and get funding for it. And you cannot really blame them because yes, they are in business, but that's the first key issue. The second one is that funders want to back the next exciting innovation. So funders are really looking at exciting innovation, novelty, the next AI thing that is promising to solve all the problems. But then at the cost of neglecting what is already working that might not be so interesting, so novel, but really is still solving the challenge. What we need is, number one, a market coordination function. So already there are these stakeholders, they are the innovators, there's government, there's the funders. But what is really missing in a lot of African contexts is a market coordination function. So an honest broker who takes an overall view of the market and says, these are the pilots that are there, they're solving these needs. What if pilot A and pilot B or platform A and B work together? They can reach more outcomes and really, scale up the impact that they're looking at. And then also somebody who then is able to connect these platforms to the governments and say, this is where we are seeing, a connection with the government. Because again, looking at these innovators and the platforms, another reason they're not really scaling is that building partnerships, especially with stakeholders like government, is a game of patience, is a game of strategy. And so really for the innovators, being really stretched, you're building a platform, you're building a team, you're trying to keep the lights on, you're having endless meetings with government, chasing a department, then getting there and finding you're in the wrong department. So we really need a market coordination function who really also takes up the role of brokering these partnerships, bringing people on the ground, helping with the MOUs. These are your roles. This is what we're working with. And everyone then has this overall overarching goal they're working towards, but they are really clear on their roles, their responsibilities, and what they're bringing to the table.
Varna, if I might come to you and just picking on from where Grace left off, what is the minimum evidence governments should require before deciding to scale an EdTech solution nationally or even internationally, if at all? And how should that evidence speak to learning outcomes, teacher adoption, and long-term affordability?
With regards to what minimum evidence governments need, I'm going to really broaden it because I think this is important for governments, but it's also important for other stakeholders in our ecosystem, right? We look at the donor community, we look at the researchers, the implementing partners, and we frame this in terms of 5 critical questions. And we really at the EdTech Hub say that if you really want to scale EdTech within government systems, you have to be able to ask and answer and really respond to these 5 critical questions. They're a framework that we put out in the sector a while ago, and really helpful in terms of getting to some of the salient points around scaling. The first question is, of course, directly addressing learning outcomes. Will this use of technology lead to sustained impact on learning outcomes? And we know that investment is can never be justified on just short-term gains for those that are easiest to reach, right? So this question cuts through the hype and really focuses on sustained educational outcomes rather than technology outputs, right? The distinguish between outcomes and outputs. We have seen many initiatives that look promising, but then when it comes to scale, really struggle with regards to scaling learning gains and over time. So that's one piece. The second question is, will this use of technology work for the most marginalized children and actually enhance equity as opposed to exacerbate inequities? And of course, this one I feel really strongly about. So we really need to test the viability of interventions with marginalized learners from the get-go, from the outset, right? It requires research that is genuinely localized and designed from the start for the hardest to reach learners in mind. So again, making sure that the research is contextual and not imported from the global north for the global south. Thirdly, will this use of technology be feasible to scale in a way that is cost effective and affordable for the context? And we've addressed cost a fair amount already, but really making sure that governments need to understand and have full transparency of that total cost of ownership, right? Both the upfront capital costs as well as the ongoing or recurring operational costs before committing to scale. Understanding and actually openly sharing cost models and transparency around that, to be honest, it's still a struggle in our sector. So I think that in order to make those better decisions, our governments need to know what to invest in based on cost, but more importantly, what to walk away from as well. Our fourth question is, will this use of technology be effective in the specific implementation context? So very similar, making sure that using evidence wisely knows, which findings apply to a specific group versus which findings apply to others. And so it's really addressing not only what works, but understanding those enabling conditions that require success, right? Those wraparound supports, the infrastructure, the teacher professional development, the community dynamics, all those things that make an intervention viable in one setting versus another. And then finally, and we've touched on this as well, will this use of technology align with government priorities and strengthen national education systems? This is really at the heart of what we should be doing to make sure that we don't have isolated, disconnected pilots, right? EdTech is, of course, most likely to be effective at scale when it's aligned from day one with government education systems, with the education sector plans, with local priorities. Standalone interventions, we know can show impressive results in isolation, but they collapse when either the donor funding ends or the government priority shifts. So we need to move away from thinking of alignment just as a bureaucratic nicety, but really to a precondition for sustainability. So these questions together, I think that they don't require, they require reflection, right? So they're not simple yes, no answers, but really thinking about the how, the why, and the extent to which an intervention is genuinely meeting the bar.
It's great that you actually pose those questions with solutions to those questions as well. But George, if I come to you in terms of some of the issues that Verna has mentioned, alignment with government priorities, how is national education data currently being used to guide EdTech investments?
National education data is primarily being used in many countries for reporting and for planning. And these got me from what is generally referred to as education management information systems. And that is used to track student enrollment, teacher deployment, school infrastructure, and maybe gadget distribution across the scene. But let me make a bigger point of this. Governments are not what we call at the foundation co-creators of the problem and the solutions, right? The government are consulted at last, not at the first time. So it's difficult to see where the data sits because number one, the government does not own the data, right? In many cases, the government does not own the content and does not own the delivery model. So if you want coherence to put a stop to this fragmentation, consultation should begin right at the beginning of redefining together, government and partners, what is this problem we are trying to solve here? What should be the content and how should it be delivered? I think co-owning, co-designing, and the data being with government, that is, may I say, the principal enabler in the sector. And so national education data is very complicated. As has been said, it sits with different people. It sits with different people. And unless we find a more credible, legitimate, robust place where we all can refer to as this is the data that can be used with the government's consent, then we are all lost. We'll be referring to different data at a time. Right now, EMAIS, or the Education Information Management System, is the source of information, and in many cases, it is co-funded by government and partners.
Talk to us about the strategies that are in place to avoid duplication of efforts across government and the private sector.
So there's a renewed effort, right, from the AU to member states, framework policy frameworks guiding how EdTech should be viewed and implemented across from one country to the other. One of the efforts is to really bring the ecosystem together in country, right? Let's co-design. Let's co-design, right? Let's think through the problem together. Let's design the solution together, and let's design the delivery model together, right? So across countries, from Kenya to Rwanda to Namibia to South Africa and even Liberia, where I am now, if we do those things, there will be bringing together local solutions for local problems in the edtech field. But in the fragmented stage that we've been talking about here, it will be difficult if we don't convey who is doing what is happening, and how is it being delivered. And yeah, one pilot may fulfill learning outcomes and tout it, but there are multiple pilots existing in silos, and it's difficult for any one ministry to bring all of this together, and the capacity ought to be built to bring everybody together at the same table. Yeah.
Co-designing, co-owning, and delivery models also need to be considered. Werner, if I come to you, what are the most effective ways that governments, in addition to what George has said, what are the most effective ways that governments can build systems that continuously generate use of evidence for decision making rather than really relying on the one-off evaluations that Shruk talked about at the start?
The one thing that I would say is to really consider national digital learning strategies or plans. So we just spent about a year and a half working with Minister Conrad Saki in Sierra Leone on developing his first ever national digital learning strategy. And it wasn't quick in and out engagement. It happened over a good time period. So really investing the time in connecting with all the key stakeholders across the education ecosystem, doing focus groups, interviews, town hall meetings, anything to make sure that we're actually connecting the dots is really important. And then thinking through, how does that national digital learning strategy actually connect to the broader educational sector plan, right? Because we don't want the strategy living here and the education sector plan living here. They need to come together and really sing together. But our work in Ghana and Tanzania is really focused on helping governments improve decision making through data dashboards. But we know, like George said, EMIS systems can be really complicated, disjointed, and frankly speaking, different units have different data. So talk about that fragmentation. And so how do you bring this together? In Ghana, one of the first things we discovered was how many ministry agencies, of course, were collecting data independently, sometimes collecting the same data independently, right? So think about the burden on the teacher or the school leader or the district official that is being asked for the same data by multiple parties. And then you're really thinking through, okay, so the data sits in disparate databases, and we know that sometimes these databases don't talk nicely to each other or don't play well with each other. So really thinking about how do we make sure that there's a common taxonomy, right? And that the issues of data systems and data interoperability are actually front and center. So in Ghana, our team worked closely to develop that shared taxonomy, and really making sure that that makes the difference in getting everyone to speak the same language. This is foundational work. I mean, this is not glamorous work. We all know that. This is where we need to roll up our sleeves and do the hard work. But it's absolutely essential. And without it, even the best evidence tools produce noise rather than insights, right? And so we really want to cut through the noise and focus on those insights. The second thing I would say, and George alluded to it as well, is that we really need to build institutional structures that actually own the evidence use, not the evidence. I didn't say own the evidence, own the use of the evidence, right? So that the evidence that is generated is not sitting on a shelf somewhere. So making sure, again, that governments establish policies or delivery units or cross delivery units with decision makers within central agencies, and actually have some clear mandates around evidence generation, synthesis, and how it is truly going to be used for decision making.
Grace, coming to you, where have you seen successful examples of aligning incentives across governments, funders, and innovators, and what made them work? Where you've seen them. I know Werner and George have thrown some countries in mention: Ghana, Tanzania, Liberia, and the like. But what is your take when it comes to, where success has actually happened and we can see some level of sustainability there?
The one thing that stands out, and I think it's already been mentioned here, is bringing the relevant stakeholders onto the table early enough and co-designing, co-creating, having shared visions of what success looks like, and then out of that success, then and agreeing on what metrics are being tracked, agreeing on what evidence is being tracked, and then really then looking at not just outputs, but really the short term, the medium term, and the long term outcomes in terms of learners, teachers, adoption, affordability, and the things that we really are trying to solve for. A lot of countries have been mentioned, but I think in Kenya as well, the digital literacy program, yes, it has had its challenges, but they've also been very many moments where there was shared success. And this was really because people came onto the table, the stakeholders came onto the table, agreed on what the shared definition of success was, and then really looked at accomplishing or reaching the outcomes as opposed to just the output. So there's been a lot of conversations around learning outcomes. Where are the learners? How are we shifting learners' skills and understanding? I think another thing where we've seen shared incentives working across different stakeholders, and it's really not work. We've not seen a lot of examples in the EdTech sector, but we can learn from the health sector. Is looking at financing mechanisms such as the results-based financing. So having programs or projects built around shared success, and having each organization or each institution or each stakeholder understanding what outcomes must be met before financing is released from the funder or whoever is providing the financing. So these are some of the examples that probably we could borrow from other sectors that they're really working well in. And for an example, as I mentioned, is the health sector, where we could look at, especially when looking at financing and funding these EdTech initiatives and the collaborations with government, we could look at innovative approaches such as results-based financing, and adopt that in terms of just bringing together stakeholders and unlocking financing and working towards shared outcomes.
Shruk, come to you for A final question. What models of sustainable financing for EdTech have proven effective in different contexts, and how does data inform them? Because, you talked about the Muscat Foundation EdTech Fellowship as one way to look at it. But then are there other sustainable models that you have observed from your perspective, from your context as well?
Working with the government, we are actually working with different ministries in Egypt in implementing qualifying and hiring projects. We are working with the Ministry of Telecommunication and Information Technology in qualifying more than 50,000 youth in different tracks of tech, AI, and data and cybersecurity, and different tracks in tech. And also the funded programs, the donor funded programs like UNICEF, Plan, NGOs like UN Women and USAID, and also the multinational corporates. We're working with different multinational corporates to implement their qualifying and hiring projects. For example, IBM, we worked with IBM in implementing their Digital Nation Africa across Africa. We worked with Microsoft in implementing their financing project online to all African startups and all African youth. And we also worked with PepsiCo, Meta, Google, and a lot of corporates in Egypt and different countries in Africa and Middle East. This is why we can have a variety of revenue streams across different projects where B2B, B2G, and also for NGOs. And also we worked with freemium to paid upskilling pathways and results-based or impact financing, pay for success models. And also the data, it informs us of the return on investment and tracks the effectiveness of our hiring methodologies and our hiring or qualifying projects, and also help us to optimize the programs and expansion decisions across Africa. What programs that we should scale on, as it brings us more and more fund to scale another projects or to impact more and more in different countries in Africa.
A final question to us all. If we were to fix the challenges that we are experiencing across the continent when it comes to evidence that works or evidence that scales and what is working for EdTech, what would you say would be that? Not that I'm saying it's a one size fits all, no, but what would be that one thing you would like to see worked on so that EdTech can actually scale further and deeper than it is today? Shruk, I'll start with you.
For startups to scale, I think that we need to make more and more connections across the development projects and with the government, and to have a network of all the impact stakeholders in your country. And also for us, we are actually working with the government and international organizations in the first phase of designing the program. For example, we are working with the ministry and identify the overlaps versus the gaps in the ministry projects. So we found out that one of the major challenge is that the ministry graduated more than 60,000 youth, but they are not placed in decent jobs. So instead of launching a new development project, you have to launch a new project to place the graduates on a decent jobs. So our role is not just implementing qualifying and hiring projects across the continent, is advising or consulting the international organizations and the government what the market really gaps, and also to build assured data platforms and dashboard for our company or for our sake, and also for the development partner sake. So, and as Grace was saying, connecting the dots. We as Kayou Haiti were working with local partners in different countries in Africa to implement qualifying and hiring projects there. We're working with local partner in Nigeria to implement our mega event called Africa Career Summit. We implemented it for 9 years in Egypt, and now we are implementing it, or we are developing it in Africa, and it will called Africa Career Summit. So monetizing the local partnerships across the continent, this will scale our model, scale our any EdTech startup model, and also impact more and more across the continent. We should work all together to impact more.
I guess that ties back to data interoperability, where you're able to work together across the board. Grace, what would it be for you?
More conversations around the table, more not competition, but co-opetition. So cooperating, yes, everyone has their own business model. Everyone is looking for their own, revenues, but then you can cooperate. The pie is big enough for everyone to take a share of. And then also just a lot of coordination within the sector, as we've mentioned.
What I'm going to suggest, again, is to focus on our human capital, right? Just remember, like, EdTech is extremely dependent on the ability of teachers in the classroom to be able to use it, right? So no, regardless of what we penetrate the sector with, if we don't focus on teacher professional development, making sure that teachers are co-creators, co-designers, are actually part of the decision making when it comes to what technology to use in what circumstance is really important. So bringing our teaching workforce is on board is really important. I always say there is no piece of technology that can replace the art of good teaching. Because at the end of the day, we need to focus on pedagogy and learning. I again say that I'm not a technology evangelist, really. I'm an educator. I care about moving the needle on student learning. So focusing on our teacher workforce and starting as soon as possible, starting with our pre-service teacher preparation programs, and making sure that digital competencies, responsible use of AI, all the things that are hitting our sector right now, are addressed sooner rather than later. And also recognizing that our teachers are preparing the workforce of the future, right? So if we really care about making sure that our kids are ready for, the jobs of the future, so to speak, we need to make sure that our teachers are appropriately prepared. So I'm going to go whole hog and say, let's invest in our educator capacity.
Thank you so much for that. Focus on the human capital with a focus on teacher development. George, your final word.
We need to do the foundational things very well. By foundational things, I mean the things that have been alluded to. One is this. There is a movement across the continent now for Africa to own its own solutions, because the problems of Africa are local. So there has to be local solutions. We invite outside expertise only in the context that there will be knowledge and skills transfer to build the capacity of Africans who, closer to their problem, in a sustained and affordable way, can find a solution to that problem. And that's what I mean by focusing on the foundational issues. Two, the government must set the direction and standards, but the private sector should then contribute the tools and innovation and implementation capacity to to complement the system rather than create parallel systems. Part of the fragmentation is the parallel system. So if every partner, for example, brings a platform, then the system itself becomes the problem. And that's why we are here today. So to scale,
Right.
we must stand on something solid and concrete on the continent. People are already gifted. We need to empower them to do more by owning their problem and by finding the solution to their problems.
Thank you so much for your contributions. It's been really amazing having you both on the conversation and really looking into all the solutions that you've spoken about. And it's quite a lot. When we talk about data interoperability, we've talked about, institutional structures, alignment with national priorities, and then results-backed financing that could then really allow for scale to happen, focusing on human capital, and then local solutions for local problems, just like George alluded to, and the private sector being able to come up with those tools that we need, backed by a good government enablement, or in this case, creating an enabling environment for the private sector to thrive, but then also looking into other areas that need fixing, like connectivity that is not exactly standard across the continent, and also affordability that is just really a continuing problem that also will need a bit of long-term solution there, and many other solutions that we have been able to discuss today. Thank you all so much for making time for the conversation, and it's been amazing having you over all the way from Kenya, from Egypt, from Liberia, and from the United States. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to have you on another edition again soon.